Okay, this is looking at a GTM passenger side door. This is part one. I don't know how many videos I'm going to do to talk about the doors, but at this stage I've taken a lot of pictures, and we'll start out by explaining the door was fitted to the car first, and so the frame member that you see here and the forward hinges up there, basically I put that up on the car and I got those things installed in the right position and got the door to line up, only to find out that I needed to come back and actually make some cuts in the frame. I had to disconnect it from the front hinge points. I had to do that by cutting that off of the actual weldment up there in order to get the window to actually clear the track. So this bolt basically runs into the frame member here, and actually before you even do this, the frame member doesn't clear the track, so you don't have enough space between this area here. And then when you do have this space, actually if you do the cuts up here in the front, then what happens is the frame comes out and then these parts of the bar actually end up way up there. And so I made this cut and then actually just bent that in to where I can weld it down here in the corner. So anyway, I was going to talk a little bit about that, about the depth that I got the window to go down, some tricks that I did to do that. So again, basically I started out with the instructions in the book. I first found the place where the door engagement is going to be on the latch there. I tried to determine where the cutout would be. I figured that out by playing around and trial fitting and so forth. On the fitting here, this is an angle. It starts out at an angle that has these two bolt locations, and it didn't really want to sit there, and so what I did is I welded an extra tab on the bottom down here, and that way it kind of sits a little bit more naturally into the position it wants to be. I'm going to go ahead and just leave this here so that in case I have to move this up or something, maybe I can use the original holes and cut that back off. But it really doesn't matter. The main thing is to make sure that it sits in here, that it's not stressing the door, that it's nice and flat against the fiberglass in there, and that you're not forcing all that stuff together and causing cracks later on after you've painted. So anyway, once I had the door on the car, then I went on the internet and started finding out more and more about all these problems guys are having with their windows. So I felt that I was going to have to do a lot of rework. So what I did is I thought, well, you know what, I'll take the frame back out, but before I do, I'm going to mark the holes where the locations are, where the bolts are, kind of like you do if you remove a hinge or a hood or a door or something like that on a car, and you want to ensure that you put it back where you took it off. You actually trace around the washers and so forth. So I did trial fit the door before I did anything with the windows, and then once I removed the door, I found that location and traced around all the bolts, both up there on the forward and then back here on this angle. There's little marks here that point to the center line of these. I've got some circles here. I've got a little line there, and and the same with all this stuff up here. So I've got silver lines drawn with a silver permanent marker along the edge here, and then I traced around the bolts before I sanded all that stuff off. And so what I wanted to do is be able to actually bolt this thing back in position as it is when the door is correctly aligned. And then I can remove this stuff, put it back on, remove it and put it back on, and be relatively close to where things should be if I have to do a lot of rework, which apparently you do in order to get these windows to go in. The big thing on the windows that guys talk about is the rear edge here and the curvature of the window and the shape of the aft track here not being exactly the same shape as the outer door skin. So what's happening is the bottom edge of the window here is scraping along the outer door skin there. So also this piece here, normally you have a cutout, it's a recess that your track sits in down here. And what happens is if you put this thing in the way Factory 5 tells you, then the track or the window holder here that runs up and down the track will actually contact just after that recess, and it'll prevent your window from being able to roll down all the way. So that's one thing. So what I did there is I've actually made a cutout, and in order to do that correctly, I had to place the door on the car and then see what kind of clearance I had in this area between the door here and the actual frame on the car in this location down here. So right down there, you've got to see where that closes, between the door and the body, and then you have to ensure that you have that clearance here. And then what I found out was this actually sits flush. When the door is flush and lined up, this is right up against the frame, so I knew that if I kept this below that point, that I would still be okay and I wouldn't run into an issue with closing the door. So I went ahead and made that cutout. That allowed that track to actually come down. You can see if you look in line with the door that it's just a protrusion of that nut there that's sticking out. So what I'll do is I'll extend this protruded area or the recessed area aft a little bit and just bring this up here and then close that off with fiberglass. So I'll probably build up a little some spacers and maybe a little cover there, and then just glass over that and remove the cover later. The other thing is this track I actually put on the vise, and I used a forming block. It didn't need to be bent that much, so there was no, I didn't have to cut it and rebend it. Basically what I did is I just shrunk the metal a little bit by using it's kind of a forming block tool. And basically the V here, as I rest that over the track and just kind of gently pound it along the entire length, I'm able to actually shrink that metal slightly, and that way I don't get a bow or a wrinkle in the actual track flange itself. And you don't have to bend it very much, but you do have to straighten that thing out. And what that does is it keeps this window away from that door skin, but still allows it to go down in there. So the door skin and the track back here, match that curvature, and it prevents that from contacting here. Another thing I did was there's actually spacers for these screws. There's a nylon spacer right here, and there's also one up forward here. And what that does is it actually places the top part of the window a little bit more out, which prevents the edge from hitting, but also allows you the proper space so that when the window's coming up, it doesn't contact this immediately. So if I take the battery, I'll show you what I'm talking about. What I'm using here is I'm actually using a 14.8 volt battery, slightly over what you probably need, but I'm just connecting it to the leads that I have here, and I'm just tapping it, and you can see as I tap, that window will start coming up, and you'll see I still need to shave a little bit back there, but you'll see that the window's not hard against this side, against that fiberglass. It's just kind of resting there, and when you put your felt seal along there, it should be fine with the pressure that results from bending this and spacing these so that your window is kind of out a little bit. Anyway, so I tap this and I basically come up, and as you see in the back, it starts to come out and then engages and then comes the rest of the way up. What I found out is when this window's all the way up, that this clamp is actually to the max there. It's actually coming out of the opening there, and then the top of the window is pretty high. It's actually up above where it will engage the seal that runs across here on the car. And then here, you know, I have enough to put a pinky in there, so basically, you know, I should be able to get that to ride over. I may need to put a guide there. I'm not sure if I'll need more gap here. I might have to cut this off and pull that back. But the main thing is to get a setting to where you can get this thing on the car and actually work it on the car. So these are kind of the initial points to where I shouldn't have a whole lot of work to get this thing to work the way it is on the car. But when you first begin and you don't have spacers and you haven't, you know, bent your track and some other things I'm going to show you in a minute, it's almost impossible to even get close to having anything that works right. Your window won't go up and down. You'll be hitting things. There'll be interference and a lot of problems if you go along with the Factory Five instructions, unfortunately. They really need to kind of walk through a step-by-step process for doing these doors the right way. Another thing that is probably critical and really provides a lot in terms of allowing the window to go down is these motors here are right on the top edge of this motor, and you'll see in the pictures below, once I post this video on the website, you'll see in the pictures below that I took and actually removed a whole section of the housing here where there was nothing. It was just a cover over an area that had a couple of plastic molded, almost like walls inside. And I just basically cut that out with a high-speed wheel. And then I rebent the edges of the cover to close that area off, so it almost looks factory. But that gives you another half of an inch or more, or 3/4 of an inch to an inch of downward travel of the window, to the extent that your seals will almost cover the upper edge of the window once it's all the way down. So when I go all the way down, I'm taking the battery and basically I just reverse the polarity on the motor, if I can get it attached. And I'll tap it down, and you can see as I'm tapping it down that the bolt right there, you know, it runs right by that frame member. And before that bolt was hitting this thing, you can actually see the mark right there on the frame. And so anyway, as it comes down, you'll see how close things get. You know, I want to miss that bolt up there in the front, and so you'll see it comes down there. And I'm missing that bolt. It's actually on this side of that big heavy-duty bolt. And then I'm coming down close to where, right here, I would actually hit the motor already. I would have hit that housing because it's actually right there. And my window would have been down the maximum amount at that height. Some guys leave it that way, you know, because they don't go in and they, you know, you can't do anything if you have that housing sitting there. So they relocate the motor and do some other stuff. But if you just cut that section of the housing off there, that'll help you a lot. The other thing is the mount here is not, it's actually angled slightly different from the factory. And all you have to do is take a couple of big crescent wrenches and pull that thing this way and then kind of straighten it out so that the motor is tucked in as closely as possible to the frame member there. So that'll help with this area right here. You want to get that motor in so that your the screw on the housing here that mounts that part of the motor to the housing isn't contacting your window right here. So with that tucked away, tucked against the frame, and then this area trimmed off, and you know, note here that I would have already contacted my fiberglass with the carrier, with the track there. So already I'm, you know, that far into the fiberglass, which would have held the window even further up than it is right now. So the first thing you're going to be limited by is the track coming down, and then you're going to run into your motor after you make that clearance. And then, you know, even before that, another thing, if you back way up, is, if you notice down here, there's a nut instead of a bolt head. And so what I did is I took the bolt and I cut the head off and retained the threaded portion of the bolt, and I used it as a stud. And that way I don't have a bolt head, or I don't have the threads protruding through the back side and scraping against the door skin behind the window. So that allows, so that just keeps that interference from occurring, and you have just enough threads to clamp down and retain that window there. So it's really a good way to reduce that cross space there where it's causing that interference on the back. So again, straightening the track, getting it spaced off here, and converting that bolt to a stud and using a nut is really what allows the back window to go up and down here without interfering. And then to get the window to go down far enough, it's trimming this here and then ensuring obviously that your bolt on the track, the window holder's not contacting here. So those are some adjustments. The other thing here is the cable was lined up at the bottom, and I did move that. That was really easy. I just took the cover off and pulled it out and literally moved it over. It took about a second to do it. Nothing came apart. There's no, if you just take the cover off and move it, you shouldn't have a problem with having this spring mechanism in here undo, or the cable coming out or something like that. So no surprises. I know one guy had one come apart. I don't know why, but I didn't have a problem at all. It was really easy. Anyway, once that's clocked correctly, then again, that allows your motor to come down further, because originally it's connected to that one, which runs right into the bottom of the door. This allows it to kind of point forward a little bit. It keeps you from binding that up and having that extreme bend. So I've got the motor lower. I'm going to trim it's barely touching. Actually, this still moves, so it's not a big deal there, but I'm going to trim that just to have a little bit of air in that gap. But yeah, so the cable, this cable, trimming that housing, pulling the motor away from that area, dropping or changing that to a stud. I mean, all these things cause this window to basically come down a little more and a little more and a little more, until ultimately, if I bring it down all the way, I'm right here. So we're talking about a pinky width, and by the time I have the seals up there, then you're not going to be able to see that window. So so that's the idea. You can see down here, it's it's literally maxed out down against the thing there. It's maxed down against where I made the cut. There's clearance here because I pulled that motor in, so there's clearance as a pass there. The track is maxed out all the way down there, against the fiberglass. So I'm maxed here, I'm maxed there, I'm maxed there, and I'm maxed out here, all at the same point. So as you do it, the really important thing is to, a little bit there, a little bit here, look again, stop, test your up and down of the window, and then just consider each point that window is going to interfere, and just look at things. And the stud idea, the reclocking of this thing, and the cutting out of the housing, those are things that just observation, and trying over and over and looking, you start noticing that stuff. This thing here, so what I'm going to do is I've got some reinforcements, steel that is actually some pretty stout stuff that I got off a piece of gym equipment. And there's what I cut it off of. And so what I'm going to do is I've cut these into angles, and I'm going to rejoin and weld a section. I'll cut it off tonight and weld a section and shape it so that it matches the different angles here, and then I'll weld that I'll put a heavy-duty piece of steel across this to rejoin that with a heavy mount.